an extraterrestrial spider crawled into the woman's mouth. It released digestive fluid, melting the woman's muscles from the inside, and then feasting on her. Meanwhile, the little girl was unaware that her pet spider was an extraterrestrial killer. Pets in the apartment building kept disappearing. Tenants were also going missing, which she realized in time and saved her family. This is the plot of the latest thriller movie, Spider in the House. Frank works at a pest control company. On this day, he braved the heavy snow to help Helga deal with a rodent problem. As Frank arrived in the hallway, he noticed a puddle of sticky fluid near the ventilation duct. Unaware of what kind of insect had left it, Helga suffers from Alzheimer's disease. She had long forgotten about contacting the pest control company. She wanted to chase Frank away. Fortunately, there was a noise from behind the wall. Helga finally remembered that there might be mice in her house. Frank carried his tools and inspected everywhere. He saw a trail of blood in the utility room. Next to it was a blood-stained helmet. He illuminated the ventilation duct and saw his colleague covered in blood. Then Frank screamed from inside the room. He was dragged into the darkness by an unknown creature. Although Helga saw everything, she was quickly distracted by a TV program. She sat her back on the couch and resumed knitting, forgetting about the recent incident. Shortly after, Helga heard noises behind the wall again and called the pest control company once more. This situation entered a cycle. What kind of creature was hiding in Helga's house? 4 days ago, an extraterrestrial spider arrived on Earth along with a cluster of asteroids, accidentally falling into the apartment where Helga lived. That night, her granddaughter, Charlotte, crawled into the utility room through the ventilation duct. She discovered the uniquely patterned spider. Charlotte put it in a matchbox and crawled back to her own home through the ventilation duct. Charlotte lived in the same apartment building as her grandmother and aunt, but their relationship wasn't very close. She placed the small spider in a glass jar and named it Max because her parents were busy every day with no time to spare for their daughter. Her younger brother wasn't as interesting as the spider, so Charlotte felt lonely. She immersed herself in her own world, occasionally catching insects to feed Max. Max spun a small web on the jar's lid, and Charlotte soon noticed that Max was different from regular spiders. It moved quickly and had a huge appetite, growing at an astonishing rate. Charlotte cherished the time spent with her parents. She was at the dining table that day, shared the spider information she found herself, but all the parents' energy is focused on work and their younger brother.
Anyone even listening to me?
I am. Blue blood.
Forget it!
Although Charlotte's stepfather, Eric, is just an apartment manager, but he never gave up on his dream of becoming a comic artist. Under his influence, Charlotte developed a love for drawing. She frequently used her paintbrush to depict spiders. Upon seeing them, Eric wanted to include the giant spider in his comics. Little did he know that his daughter's pet spider possessed extraordinary abilities. In the evening, Max opened the jar lid and slipped into Helga's house through the ventilation duct and devoured her pet parrot. In the evening, Charlotte's family heard a scream from upstairs. It turned out that Aunt Helga had discovered the gruesome death of the parrot.
Sweet Jesus, what the hell happened to it?
Rats.
Aunt Helga thought it was the work of mice, but what kind of mouse could chew through an iron cage? To find out what really happened, Aunt Helga contacted Frank. A professional arrived. Frank ruled out the possibility of mice. Frank followed the traces on the wall and opened one side of the ventilation duct. He found bloodstains inside. He tossed insecticide smoke inside, preparing to exterminate the entire building. Charlotte didn't suspect Max. She had recently discovered that the small spider could mimic the sound of any animal. It responded to Charlotte's feeding whistle. Besides that, it was also afraid of mothballs. Charlotte realized she knew too little about spiders. She searched online for relevant information and learned about the brutal hunting process of spiders. They produce digestive fluids that enter the bodies of their captured prey, liquefying the flesh of their prey before consuming it. Meanwhile, Frank was unaware that he had gotten into trouble. He was in the process of exterminating pests in the building and soon reached Charlotte's room. Frank learned that the girl had a pet spider and became curious.
What the?
She doesn't like you.
After finishing the pest control job, Frank left, but Max wasn't afraid of the insecticides. Its appetite grew larger. It targeted the neighbor's small dog. However, the dog's barking alerted the homeowner. The dog was locked outside and escaped unharmed. Max climbed onto the woman and bit her. The homeowner fell to the ground and hit her head. She went to the mirror to check the wound. only to discover a festering bite mark. In the next moment, the woman sprayed blood from her mouth and collapsed into the bathtub. Max crawled out from behind her and entered the woman's mouth, releasing digestive fluids inside her before emerging from her open abdomen. Charlotte was unaware that Max went out to hunt. She visited the biologist upstairs, wanting to buy some fish for Max to eat. The biologist had never seen such a spider before and couldn't find any similar species online. Charlotte mentioned that Max could double in size within a few hours. She also showed the feeding whistle to the biologist. Whenever Charlotte blew the whistle, Max would respond. The biologist reminded her, "The creature you've captured cannot be a spider. Spiders do not have vocal cords, and it's even less likely for them to mimic human whistling." The biologist had never seen such a fascinating species. He wanted to keep Max for observation for a few days. As a gesture of gratitude, the biologist was willing to give Charlotte a large fish tank for free to serve as Max's new home. In order to get the fish tank, she immediately agreed. Meanwhile, Eric and his wife, they were discussing the issue of moving. Suddenly, strange sounds came from the ventilation duct. Eric stood on a stool to investigate. The neighbor's dog rushed out, frightening him and causing him to collapse on the ground. Eric picked up the dog and went to find the female neighbor. However, there was no answer when he knocked on the door. Fortunately, Eric was in charge of maintenance for the entire building. He opened the door with the key, intending to put the dog inside first. As soon as he entered, he saw a pool of blood. Eric followed the trail and looked towards the bathroom. He discovered the gruesome scene of the deceased female neighbor. He quickly called the police, requesting the police to handle the body. Before Eric could make sense of the situation, he received a call from the biologist. The biologist wanted to talk to Eric about the spider. After studying for several days, he couldn't determine what species Max actually was. Biologists suspect this spider is highly aggressive and possibly had a potent venom, so he wanted Eric to talk to Charlotte and not to continue keeping Max as a pet. Eric initially didn't take it seriously until he saw that Max had turned into a giant spider. After returning home, Eric told Charlotte they would hand Max over to the health department. Charlotte became very angry after listening. Charlotte said that Eric hated her. She wanted to go to Thailand to find her biological father, but in reality, her biological father lived just a 25-minute drive away, but he had never visited his daughter. Eric and his wife were afraid of hurting Charlotte's feelings, so they lied to her about her father being in Thailand. Now that Eric slipped up and revealed the truth, Charlotte became even more hurt. She pushed her stepfather away and ran out of the apartment. Meanwhile, the biologist didn't actually send Max to the health department. Instead, keep it in captivity. During the night, Max escaped from the fish tank and resumed hunting. The aunt quickly noticed that her pet cat was missing. Only faint meowing could be heard from the ventilation duct. The aunt crawled in to investigate. Unexpectedly, a flashlight malfunctioned. Immediately after, Max appeared. The hallway echoed with the aunt's screams. She was trapped in the ventilation duct by Max's spiderweb. Then Max crawled into Charlotte's house. Its enormous body knocked down Eric, and it bit Charlotte's mother. Meanwhile, Charlotte, wearing headphones, didn't hear the commotion. At that moment, the neighbor's dog kept barking incessantly. Charlotte thought the dog was hungry. She went to the kitchen to get dog food. She didn't look up from her phone. She didn't notice that Eric was being dragged into the ventilation duct. When Charlotte finally put down her phone, she realized that her parents were gone. She saw the open ventilation duct and immediately went to investigate. However, Eric and his wife had already been dragged away. They were stored deep in the pipes as food by Max. At that moment, the pet dog also crawled into the ventilation duct. Charlotte tried to call it back, but she faintly heard Max's crawling sound. Fear crept over her. She quickly used a cabinet to block the ventilation duct. Immediately, terrifying thuds came from behind. Then Max sneaked into the bedroom and captured Charlotte's younger brother. The whole family vanished. Charlotte forced herself to calm down. She remembered that Max was afraid of the smell of camphor, so she crushed the camphor balls at home into powder and mixed it with water in a toy water gun. Charlotte entered the ventilation duct with her equipment. As soon as she crawled in, she saw the cat's corpse. She first crawled into the biologist's room to gather information, but the room was in a mess. The biologist was hanging from the ceiling, killed by Max. They were already dead. Then Charlotte crawled into her grandmother's house. Fortunately, her grandmother was covered in the scent of camphor balls, so Max didn't target her. Charlotte replenished her supply of camphor ball ammunition in time and covered herself with it. At that moment, she heard Eric's screams. At this moment, the ant has already been dragged away and eaten by the spider. After Charlotte opened the barrier, she saw her stepfather wrapped up like a rice dumpling, but he was trapped in the garbage chute. A slight misstep could result in a fatal fall, and Max's web had corrosive properties. Charlotte had to rescue him carefully. She poured camphor ball water on Eric. Indeed, the green spiderwebs melted away. As the father and daughter were preparing to climb out of the chute, they suddenly heard the cries of their younger son. An excited Eric shouted their son's name, which attracted Max. In the midst of the panic, they accidentally slipped and fell into the garbage bin below. Meanwhile, Max crawled out of the duct. He keeps getting closer to stiff Charlotte. At this critical moment, Eric grabbed the camphor ball water bottle and poured it forcefully onto Max. Max let out a piercing screech and retreated back into the garbage chute, and Eric took the opportunity to apologize to his daughter. At the same time, Frank received a phone call. He came again to exterminate pests for the old lady. After Frank was dragged into the ventilation duct, he accidentally escaped to the garbage disposal area.
That's your spider? Why didn't you get a fucking dog?
The irritable Frank wanted to leave this place, but the door near the garbage station was locked. Eric stopped Frank. He explained, "That big spider is afraid of camphor balls," but they only had one bottle left. Luckily, Frank also had a weapon. He keeps getting closer to stiff Charlotte. The spilled water washed away the camphor ball scent on them. Max sticks Frank with spiderweb, dragged him down to the vent, pierced Frank's body. Eric knew he couldn't sit and wait for death. He pulled Charlotte to hide in the trash compactor and tightly held the compaction switch, waiting for the opportunity to crush Max. Charlotte's mother and younger son were also hidden in the compactor by the spider. Now the whole family of four was reunited. Eric used the last bottle of camphor ball water to save his wife and child. Then he held the remote control and waited silently. Max was about to approach the gate, but the remote control suddenly malfunctioned. Eric noticed that the plug had come loose. He quickly reached out to reconnect it. Meanwhile, Charlotte grabbed a plank to block Max. At this critical moment, Eric finally managed to plug it in properly, but he was struck by an electric shock and lost consciousness. Fortunately, Charlotte reacted quickly. She pressed the remote control, successfully crushing Max. Charlotte's mother dragged her husband out for first aid, successfully helped Eric regain consciousness. The family hugged each other, crying. Unbeknownst to them, behind the compactor, Max's eggs had piled up. The movie ends here. The dilapidated apartment building ravaged by a snowstorm. The terrifying extraterrestrial spider lurks in the dark, coupled with children as the main characters. From the script to the character development, it follows the typical pattern of American horror films. If you enjoy my channel, please give me a subscription.